In Hollywood, everyone talks about who's the toughest, but the real question is simpler. Who stays calm when the room turns into a trap? Because on a certain day in Los Angeles, the air on a studio lot didn't feel like movies. It felt like territory. Like a place where egos get tested the way fighters test range, quietly, with tiny steps no one notices until it's too late. Bruce Lee was already a storm in human form. Not loud, not messy, precise. He moved like he was solving a math problem with his body. Angles, timing, weight shifts, pressure. People watched him train and said the same thing every time. That's not acting. LeBell was the opposite kind of legend. A wrestler, a grappler, a man who built his reputation in places where you don't get applause, only outcomes. If you were careless around him, you learned fast that strength doesn't need to look dramatic. It just needs to close the distance. They weren't enemies. They didn't hate each other. That's the part people always get wrong. The tension wasn't personal. It was professional. Bruce was bringing something new to the American martial arts world, something fast, stripped down, brutally honest. And in rooms full of stuntmen and tough guys, that kind of skill doesn't just impress people, it challenges them. Because if Bruce was right, if efficiency beat brute force, then a lot of men who built their identity on being hard would suddenly have to admit they'd been training the wrong way. And Gene didn't care about myth, he cared about proof. He was the type of man who could watch 1,000 punches and ask one question, okay, but what happens if I grab you? That question is where martial arts meets wrestling. It's where the dream of clean technique collides with the ugly truth of contact, sweat, weight, leverage, gravity. And on this day, gravity was waiting. It didn't start with fists, it started with conversation. A circle forms naturally when fighters are in the same space, not because anyone plans it, because men sense energy like animals sense weather. A few stunt guys drift closer, someone leans on a crate, someone else pretends they're not watching. Bruce stands relaxed but not casual. His shoulders are loose, his hands are alive, quiet, ready, like they're listening. He's talking, smiling even, but his eyes keep doing that thing, that scanning. Gene steps in with that wrestler posture that never fully leaves you. Not hunched, not tense, just built to resist being moved, built to feel pressure early. They're trading ideas, techniques, theories, the kind of talk that sounds friendly until you realize both men are mapping each other's strengths. Bruce demonstrates a movement, something quick, a redirect, a strike line that appears and vanishes. People react with that involuntary sound, half laugh, half shock. Gene nods, respectful. Then Gene says something simple, not insulting, not loud, just the kind of sentence that shifts the temperature. Show me when someone ties you up. Bruce doesn't flinch. He doesn't back away either. That's the thing about him. He doesn't avoid tests. He invites them. Because his confidence isn't arrogance. It's built from 1,000 hours of proof in a mirror, on heavy bags, in sparring rounds where he learned how fast a human can adapt if they're honest about their weaknesses. Bruce takes a half step closer. Go ahead. And now the circle tightens.
Not in a dramatic way. In a real way, in the way a room tightens when everyone senses the moment is crossed from talk to reality. Gene reaches, not for a punch, not for a flashy move. He reaches like a man reaching for a seatbelt. Control first. He gets contact, an arm, a shoulder, a grip that doesn't look violent until you realize how hard it is to remove. Wrestling grips aren't just holds, they're decisions. They're the beginning of ownership. Bruce reacts instantly. His body shifts, his hips turn, his balance changes. He's not panicking. He's trying to solve the problem with speed, with alignment, with the logic that always worked for him. Create space, strike the opening, reset. But Gene doesn't give space. That's the first collision between their worlds. Bruce is used to opponents who respond to pressure by bracing or flinching or pulling back. Gene doesn't pull back. Gene moves in. He makes distance smaller. He turns speed into a wall by sticking to Bruce like wet cloth. Bruce tries to angle out. Gene follows. Bruce tries to frame with the forearm, create separation. Gene slips past it. And the people watching, stuntmen, fighters, men who thought they'd seen everything, start realizing something terrifying. This isn't about who's better. This is about which skill set answers the other one first. Bruce's hands are fast, but Gene's grip is patient. Bruce's movement is sharp, but Gene's pressure is heavy. Every time Bruce tries to reset the range, Gene denies it, quietly, efficiently, like he's erasing chalk marks off a board. Bruce attempts another shift, a sudden change of level, maybe a break, maybe a strike line. Gene doesn't rush. He clamps. He tightens the hold, pulls Bruce into a position that wrestlers live in. Chest contact, shoulder pressure, hips close enough that balance becomes a negotiation. For the first time, Bruce can't just move away, not cleanly, not freely. And now the room isn't watching a demonstration, they're watching a lesson. Because martial arts loves the moment of impact, the strike, the snap, the visible result. Wrestling loves the moment before impact, where you remove choice, where you take away the ability to do what you want. Gene adjusts his grip, and suddenly Bruce's posture changes, not dramatically, just enough that the watchers feel it, that micro shift where you realize, oh, he's stuck. Bruce's face stays controlled, but his focus sharpens. He's not angry, he's not embarrassed, he's calculating. But Gene has years of feeling men calculate. Wrestlers don't fear plans, they crush plans with pressure. And then Gene does the thing that makes the circle go silent. He turns the hold into a finish. Not a slam, not a wild throw, a squeeze, a constriction that doesn't look like a movie move, because real control doesn't look cinematic. It looks boring right up until someone's breath changes. Bruce's breathing tightens for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction, the entire myth of invincibility meets a truth Bruce already understood deep down. No style is complete until it faces what it avoids. And Bruce, being Bruce, doesn't deny it. He stays present. He stays fighting. But the room is now watching a clash that can't be explained with loyalty or fandom or my style beats your style. It's physics now, leverage, air, time. And the next few seconds will decide what story people tell forever.
The silence breaks first. Not with shouting, not with anyone stepping in, just a few nervous laughs, the kind people make when something real is happening and they don't know what to do with their hands. Bruce is still in it, still trying to find the seam in the hold. He shifts his hips, tries to rotate his shoulders, tries to create a sliver of space, because for a striker, space is oxygen. But Gene is literally stealing oxygen now. That's what a constriction does. It isn't pain-based, it's system-based. It's not, I'll hurt you until you stop. It's, I'll remove your options until your body decides for you. Bruce's hands move, quick, intelligent. He tries to pry. He tries to wedge a forearm. He tries to turn the angle. For a second, it looks like he might break free. Gene adjusts. That adjustment is what separates wrestlers from everyone else. They don't win by one big moment. They win by a chain of tiny corrections. Bruce's movement slows just a fraction, not because he's weak, because his breath is changing. And then it happens. A blink, a micro-stumble, a brief softening in the body, the kind of moment that, if you're in combat sports, you recognize immediately. Not unconscious like the movies, not collapsing, just the body giving up a half step of control. Gene releases, fast, clean, not triumphant, not angry, almost professional, like he just finished a drill. Bruce staggers one step, catches himself, eyes wide for a moment, because the nervous system hates surprises. Someone in the circle inhales sharply. Another guy mutters something like, "Damn." Bruce doesn't explode. He doesn't lash out. He doesn't demand a rematch right there. He resets. And that's why the story matters, because lesser men would turn it into ego. Bruce turns it into information. He straightens his shirt, rolls his shoulders, breathes deep once like he's restarting the machine. His face is controlled, but his eyes are alive, processing what just happened, frame by frame. Gene says something simple, not mocking. "Now you know." Bruce nods, and the circle, those stuntmen, those tough guys, quietly recalibrate their understanding of what fighting even is.
Because what they just saw wasn't Bruce got beaten. It wasn't Gene proved wrestling is best. It was the oldest lesson in combat. If your style has a hole, someone will find it. And the most dangerous thing a fighter can believe is that their strengths are universal. That day, Bruce learned something that would echo through everything he built after. Speed and precision are incredible until someone removes your ability to create distance. Striking is beautiful until you're tied up. Power is impressive until leverage steals it. And from that point on, something subtle changes in Bruce's approach. Not his confidence, his completeness. Because what made Bruce Lee different wasn't that he never got checked. It's that he treated every check like a gift, a data point, a missing piece. After the incident, people say Bruce started taking grappling seriously, wrestling, judo, clinch control, escape mechanics, because now it wasn't theory anymore. He had felt the cage. He had felt what happens when the fight becomes contact and pressure instead of range and timing. And that's where the myth flips into something bigger. Because the Bruce Lee we remember, the one people quote, the one whose philosophy outlived him, that Bruce wasn't built in moments where he dominated. He was built in moments where he discovered a limitation and refused to live with it. Gene, meanwhile, walks away with his reputation intact, not as the guy who humiliated Bruce, but as the guy who brought reality into the room. A man who could keep it calm, keep it clean, prove a point without turning it into a circus. That's why this story survives, not because it's a who would win fantasy, but because it's a rare moment when two worlds touched, martial arts and wrestling, and both became sharper afterward. And for anyone watching today, the takeaway is brutal and simple. The best fighters aren't the ones who never lose. They're the ones who can get surprised and still come back smarter. Because Bruce didn't leave that day weaker, he left that day informed. And that is exactly how legends evolve.
After Gene let go, nobody clapped, because clapping would turn it into a show. And this wasn't a show. It was a calibration. The circle of stuntmen loosens, people pretending they need to go do something, adjust a cable, check a mark, when really they're giving both men space to breathe without anyone losing face. Bruce takes a few steps away, slow, controlled, like he's keeping his pride on a leash. Gene stays where he is, hands relaxed, posture neutral, no victory pose, no grin. He doesn't need the room to validate him. Wrestlers are used to winning in silence. And then something important happens that most retellings skip. This doesn't become a feud, it becomes a bridge. Because both men understood something deeper than ego. Hollywood is full of tough talk, but a set is still a workplace. You don't survive long if every lesson turns into a war. So the energy shifts from challenge to conversation. Not immediately, not in a cheesy way, but in that slow, professional way where two high-level fighters realize the other one is dangerous for real, and that means they can learn something. Accounts of exactly how it started vary depending on who's telling it, but the stable part across reputable retellings is this. Lee and LeBell end up connected beyond that moment, and grappling starts showing up more clearly in Bruce's thinking and training as the years go on. And that's where the story becomes bigger than who won. Because the true collision wasn't Bruce versus Gene, it was striking versus control. Bruce Lee's world is built on range, timing, intercepts, the idea that you can end a problem before it becomes a mess. Gene LeBell's world is built on contact, clinch, leverage, the idea that if you can touch a man safely, you can decide where the fight lives. So after that day, imagine what starts happening in Bruce's head. Not excuses, not denial, but design.
He starts looking at fighting like a machine that needs no weak side. If a wrestler closes the gap, what's the answer? If someone grabs your waist, what's the answer? If your arms get pinned, what's the answer? Because the whole point of Bruce's philosophy, what later becomes Jeet Kune Do as a concept, is not my style beats your style. It's keep what works, discard what doesn't, and stay honest about reality. And nothing forces honesty like being caught for even 2 seconds. That's why, years later, this story gets recycled whenever people argue about real fights versus movie fights. It even gets pulled into pop culture as inspiration, like the discussion around the on-set tough guy legend that Quentin Tarantino played with in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But here's what the myth always misses. Bruce wasn't trying to be invincible. He was trying to be complete. And Gene wasn't trying to humiliate him. He was representing the oldest truth in combat sports. If you don't train that phase, you don't own that phase. So, what do 2 professionals do after the smoke clears? They turn the moment into mutual respect. They turn a clash into a training problem. They turn embarrassment into evolution. And the reason this story still matters is simple. It captures the exact point where martial arts stops being performance and becomes system. Because once you've felt that kind of control, once you've felt someone take your breathing options away, your entire definition of skill changes. You stop asking, can I hit him? And you start asking, can I survive every range? And that question is where Bruce Lee becomes more than a fighter. He becomes a thinker.
Years later, the story starts changing, because that's what stories do when they survive long enough. In one version, Gene choked him out. In another, Gene lifted him in a fireman's carry and paraded him around the set. In others, it's a friendly workout that got exaggerated by people who weren't even there. Even today, you'll find reputable write-ups saying the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood moment was partly inspired by Lee's first meeting with LeBell on the Green Hornet set, described as a lift and carry, not a full fight. And you'll also find martial arts community arguments that challenge how much Gene's various versions can be independently verified. So if you're looking for a clean, courtroom-perfect, this is exactly what happened ending, this story refuses to give you one. But that uncertainty is exactly what makes it valuable. Because the core doesn't depend on whether it was a choke, a carry, or a clinch that got too real. The core is a clash of ranges. Bruce Lee represented the future of striking efficiency, angles, intercepts, timing, speed that made grown men hesitate. Gene LeBell represented the ancient truth of grappling. Once I touch you, I can decide what you're allowed to do. That's why the lesson has outlived the details. If your system is built to operate at distance, then the clinch is the test. If your system is built to dominate contact, then the entry is the test. This is also why modern MMA feels like the final verdict on their debate. MMA didn't prove one man right and the other wrong. It proved something colder. Every range is real, and every range demands training. Striking alone can look unstoppable right up until someone sticks to you. Grappling alone can look inevitable right up until someone turns your entry into a penalty. That's what Gene and Bruce accidentally symbolized on that set, the moment martial arts stopped being tribes and started becoming a full map. And here's the part that makes Bruce Lee's legacy even bigger. A fragile ego would have treated that moment like an insult. Bruce, by most consistent accounts from people around his world, treated martial arts like a laboratory. He kept what worked, dropped what didn't, and hunted weaknesses like they were unfinished business. So whether the incident was dramatic or mild, whether it was a squeeze or a scoop, the meaning stays sharp. Bruce Lee didn't fear being tested, he feared being incomplete. And Gene LeBell didn't fear myths, he feared fantasy. That's why this story still gets told in gyms, in dojos, on film sets, and online forums, because it's not really about who won. It's about the moment a striking genius and a grappling legend touched the same reality. And reality didn't care about reputations. It only cared about leverage, air, and control. And if you listen closely, that's the real ending. Not a victory, a warning. Train the range you don't want to talk about.